Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of the latest printing and the latest edition of Empire of the Sun, the World War II strategic level game of the Pacific Theater, designed by Mark Herman and published by GMT Games. Now when I first got back into wargaming, I was extraordinarily excited about this game, and it was out of print. So it was the first game that I put on GMT's P500 system, and a year and a half later it's arrived. Very excited to take a look at what's inside this latest edition. And that's not all. We also have a special bonus. We're going to take the Cube4ME challenge with this game. So Cube4ME is a company that creates storage solutions for war games, and they've sent along their custom trays for Empire of the Sun. So we're going to unbox Empire of the Sun, break apart all the counters, put them in the Cube4ME storage solution, and see if we can get it back in the box. Let's get started. So before we start out with the unboxing, I know a lot of people like games and book combinations. I'm a big fan of them as well. So Pacific Crucible, book number 1. This is a books game combination. Second book in the trilogy, The Conquering Tide. All of these are by Ian Toll. It's a Pacific War trilogy. And then lastly, Twilight of the Gods. I just finished Twilight of the Gods about 2 months ago. I feel like each book gets better. It's a great view of the tactical, operational, and strategic level view of the war. I mean, it's 1,500, 1,600, maybe 1,700 pages of reading. It's a massive book, but it's riveting writing. I think you'll greatly enjoy it. If you like book game combinations, you can't go wrong with these. I'll put a link to them down below. Let's get started now with our unboxing. I must say this is probably one of my most anticipated war games since getting back into wargaming. So I am very excited to finally get this in my hands, and I'm looking forward to playing. Let's flip it over and take a look at the back on just some of the generalities first here. So we'll start out with just to get an idea that this is a strategic level game of the war. Each turn is 4 months. It's 150 miles per hex, and it is a 1 to 2 player game, as we'll take a look at here. There's a full solo bot. Now, if we come down here to the game meter, complexity is a 7, and I haven't started learning it yet. I've looked through the rulebook a little bit. It's a pretty hefty rulebook, and it's pretty text heavy. So a 7 feels about right. I mean, I might go like in that 6 to 8 range, and I think there's also the consideration that there is a solo bot, and so you're going to learn the game and then learn the solo bot if you want to play it solo. So that might be a little bit higher than maybe 6.5 and 7.5 kind of thing, depending on whether you're adding in the solo bot. But that feels about right. One of the things I can say about Mark Herman's games is that the rule books are very precise, they're very accurate, and they're very easy to understand. And I'm a complexity. I would rather have complexity than ambiguity. I feel like complex games that are easy to learn, if they have good rule books, they're easy to learn, but where you struggle is when your rules start to get ambiguous. So I think that takes a lot of the lift out of learning this. So let's open her up. Alrighty, so new to this edition is a 3-inch box, which is a nice addition to getting all the stuff back in the box. So here we go. Let's jump in and let's get started. Now, this is the rule book, which is 56 pages, but it's not that big in reality. We've got 33 pages, and the back few pages here are scenarios, some of the startup information and things like that. There's a number of scenarios where you can play the campaign starting in different years to shorten it up, and then there is a South Pacific scenario that we'll take a look at momentarily. So here's the startup list, and then I believe the last few pages here are designer notes and a comprehensive example of play. So your lift here, if you would, from a rules standpoint, is the first 33 pages of the book. Now, I will say this, it's got rather dense text, and a lot of these pages are text heavy. So most of the pages I've looked at are 95%, 90% text. I mean, this is a lot of text. I will say from experience again, though, that Mark Herman's rule books have been kind of bastions of clarity, if you would. So I would definitely take a complex game with clear rules than a simpler game with ambiguous rules. I'm not a fan of ambiguity in rules, so I think a lot of the fact that there is a good amount of text here is due to what kind of clarity has been added to the rule set. So there is our rule book, and I will also say too, just from kind of looking at this game, seeing it on forums and hearing about people talking about it, this is a game that gets to the table. People play this quite often, so it's not the kind of game that you're going to buy and say, oh, that's too complex, I can't figure it out, and then you don't end up playing it. So I do think this gets to the table a lot. Now here is our card-driven solitaire system. I believe with the earlier version, maybe the first edition of the game, the card-driven solitaire system was not included, and it's been added now since maybe the second edition, or second edition, second printing, or something like that. But these are the rules for your solitaire bots. Now you can play either Allied or Japanese in a solo system. So a lot of depth of play here because you've got the 2-player version and then solo for either side. These are 12 pages, so a relatively modest lift, and 8 pages are the rules for the solo bots and how to execute the sequence of play and things like that. And then the last 5 or 6 pages here are a continuing example of play with some maps and some graphics talking about what happened. So not a significant addition in terms of learning the solo bot after you've learned the 2-player rules here. And we'll take a look at some of the player aids, which are fairly extensive for the solo system as well. South Pacific scenario. This has an interesting story behind it. If I'm not mistaken, this was a scenario that was added to the C3, that was the feature of the C3I magazine, the Wargaming magazine, issue number 30. And so this scenario was originally published there as kind of a learning scenario and a shorter scenario for Empire of the Sun. And then with later editions of the game, it got added to the game core itself. So this scenario is included in this version of the game. And again, we're looking at the second edition, third printing. So if you get this version, the only thing that's missing that isn't here is that the C3I magazine magazine issue number 35 has a Burma scenario for using the Empire of the Sun system. So if you want everything, you've got to get that magazine too. But again, it's not like you're getting shortchanged here. There's a lot of gameplay in this. So this basically has this smaller segment of the map printed on a smaller footprint, so you don't have to break out the big map to play this small scenario. And my understanding is this is a very good kind of entry point to the game because it's a smaller, shorter scenario. It allows you to check out some of the game systems as you're learning how to play. So let's take a look now. We get to the counters and things. Fun parts here. Two things surprised me as I was looking through the components of the game. Thing number one, there are fewer counters than I expected. I thought there were going to be a lot more counters, but there's only a sheet and a half. And it does lead me to a question as, you know, this sheet here, if we look at this half sheet of counters, it includes a good number of capital ships. So we can see Lexington, Enterprise, Wasp, the major carriers for the US side, some of the British ships here, kind of Indomitable carrier and things like that, Victorious, and then the Japanese characters, Akagi, Soryu, Shokaku, Hei. Hei is a battleship, of course. But these are some of the major ships, but it's clearly not all of the major ships of Japan. So I'm kind of curious how that system works. We can see battleships and capital ships, carriers here. And then both sides, the counters are both sides. These look to be about 3/4 of an inch characters. The other ones we'll look at here are a 1/2 inch. So there is somewhat of there must be a step system in the game, and I have not made much progress. I haven't made any progress really with the rules other than thumbing through the rule book. So kind of speculating a little bit on this. Now we come to our ground troops and air units. So we can see green must be the US, yellow here must be Japan. I'm guessing this tan colored is Britain. I'm not sure, blue, maybe New Zealand, Australian? I'm not sure, some other allies. And I don't know what the orange is over here on the other side either. We also see that, again, a good number of this main set of counters, this right-hand side are basically markers and not units. So a relatively modest counter set, which makes me think that's why it gets to the table so much. It is not a massive strategic game. It's a very contained and executable strategic game that you can play with that's not going to take a ton of time to set up, nor is it going to have an overwhelming counter set that makes the turns extremely tedious. So I think, again, from that perspective, another reason why this game tends to get to the table. So there are our counters. Now let's take a look at the player aids. So there's a good number of them. And the first two we have here are, this is the left side is the Allied Erasmus bot endgame. So this is the solo bot, tables of execution, kind of the algorithms, if you would, for the solo bots. This is the Japanese version, this is the Allied version. I'll show some close-ups on these too, but just to get an idea of the scale here, there are 3 panels to this piece of paper, this card stock here. It's very thick, good quality card stock, each printed on 2 sides. So you get 6 panels for executing the solo bot, and each one of them is for a different part or a different segment of the game. So for example, this is the Allied endgame phase, axis of determination. Here we get the allied opening phases and all phases. So each one of these cards must come into play in different times to help you determine what the actions are for the solo bot. And I've heard fantastic things about the solo bot. I know a number of people that just love to play this game solo. So Ken, you got a modest rule set, and that rule set must be teaching you basically how to follow these kind of flow charts, if you would, to execute the turns of your opponent. Now we get a general player aid card. This is 2 panels. It looks like it's got a lot of the pieces pulled out from the rule book that are things that the designers have decided would be things that you're going to be looking up quite a while. So we got offensive phases, sequence of play, strategy cards, some of the unit information, supply line rules. So I'm assuming these are some of the rules that come up fairly frequently. Replacement chart over here. So a nice kind of compendium, if you would, of some of the charts and information from the rule book. U.S. political will, national surrender. A lot of stuff going on here. This is a deep and intricate game, so it looks like a lot of fun. And now we get the startup. So these are Japanese at-start units, and this is the Japanese reinforcement schedule. I believe this is, yeah, single-sided. So again, getting an idea about, although it's a complex game, the playability, I mean, this is all you're going to have active at the start of the game for the Japanese forces, which is a very manageable counter set. And likewise, US forces at the start, it's just this top quarter here of the startup chart. And then as you can see, as the turns go along, turn 10, you've got reinforcements coming in as the US builds up later in the war. But at the start, it's a very modest counter set that you're going to be playing with. So again, not a game that's going to overwhelm you with counters and complexity or huge stacks on the board. We've got 2 more player aids here. These are combat tables. Printed on both sides. They're identical, so 1 for each player. This is your battle factor calculator. That means something, I'm sure, but not having read the rules, I'm not quite sure. And then some of the standard charts, so terrain effects charts, ground combat results, air naval combat results, and then national command chart, and then inter-service rivalry. So it must be some frequently accessed charts that you're using. Now the beautiful part, the map. Let's take a look. We have map and cards left too, so still quite a bit to go through. All right, so we got this out of the plastic. This is a matte finish, very nice cardstock, and this is a 22 by 34 inch map. And I'll show a pull-out away of this, a zoomed-out version of this, because it's going to be hard to get this, of course, in any kind of meaningful way on the camera itself. But it's got a great feel to it. I love the color palette. I mean, it's a very simple, elegant, functional map, but you can see the entire scale here of the Pacific in play. Lots of detail too. I'll show some. You can see like Midway Island here. We've got Honolulu, Hawaii, all the way over to Japan, the Philippines, Solomons, Marianas. So just a lot of remarkable detail. And I can see each one of these kind of generating their own stories in the game. So just a map here looks fantastic. And I'll keep you showing some of the some of the detail of this. So yeah, fun. Really looks like, I mean, very functional, nice, clean cut map to pull you into the game. Now, I mentioned that there were 2 things that surprised me in the game. One thing that surprised me was the low density of counters. The other thing that surprised me was the amount of cards. So it is a card-driven game, of course, and cards are going to dictate what types of moves and actions you can take in your turn. There are 2 decks, and each one of these decks has over 80 cards to it, 1 for the US, 1 for the Allied forces, and 1 for the Japanese forces. And basically these cards, I just spent like 20 minutes looking through these cards as I was opening it up. So many events that you can play as part of your strategy and part of your execution. And this, looking through these cards, now I understand a lot more what was going on when I've been reading AARs and just kind of watching a few videos on the game. I mean, just an amazing plethora of all sorts of events. And I imagine a good number of these would be hypothetical too, that could have happened but didn't happen, that are included to kind of expand the gameplay. So we got a Doolittle raid. I mean, just looking through these Australian Coast Watchers, Olympic and Coronet, the invasion of Japan, General Douglas MacArthur, Pacific, and all of them have details and information. So again, going back to the idea of a book game combination as a way to play this theater and learn about this theater, I'm really looking forward to it in terms of kind of just deepening the knowledge that that book set gave me from it, and just kind of watching the stories play out as you go through these scenarios and through the campaign. I can't wait to get this. I should have included this. If you have seen the top solitaire war games. I should have included this as a contender. This was an oversight not to put this in here. So I am looking forward to seeing how this plays as a solitaire war game too, just to see if we can get that into the top solitaire war games list. Kind of an aside, Operation Watchtower. So I could go through and on and it goes through. And I believe there's information in the back part of the rule book too about each one of these cards that kind of helps fill in some of the historical details. This, of course, is the Japanese deck. So we've got the same side, you know, U.S. Joint Staff Debate, Operation C, the Indian Ocean raid, Rear Admiral Matami Ukagi, seizure of Hawaiian Islands. So yeah, that would seem to be a hypothetical one. Operation M.O., Battle of Coral Sea. Operation Ray, attack on Milne Bay. So just so much stuff. Imperial intervention, submarine attack. Yes. Operation Hugo, the Burma offensive. So just tons of stuff. War in Europe, a major Axis victory. I'm not quite sure how those work, but yeah, you can see how these cards just kind of bring out a richness and depth of play, as well as connecting the game to historical events. So and I think that's one of the things for me that caught me off guard with this that I didn't realize, but makes me more excited to get it to the table, is the idea that these cards kind of really bring the true history and the potential history of this game to play, and it brings it out in a game to play. So I can see why people really enjoy this one. And now that we've got the game unboxed and we've taken a look at all the components, it is time for our Cube4Me challenge. We've got 3 trays here. I'm going to break the counters apart, see how they store up, and then see if we can get it back into the box. We're back. It's about 1/2 of a Monday night American football game later, and I've got all the counters punched and clipped and into the storage solution. Now, interestingly enough, let's take a look and see how we did. So we have here, these are one of the trays, and I was able to get kind of really organize them with a lot of space here. Here's a second tray. So I was able to spread these counters out and get a lot of room for them and things like that. It was really easy to fit. And interestingly enough, there are 3 trays that came with the solution for Empire of the Sun, and they fit pretty handily in 2. And what I'm wondering, I'm not quite sure why there was 3, unless the objective here is to get them all single layer. But I put some of the Japanese units here that are very similar, like the Japanese land units. I got them stacked up 2 or 3 because it seemed to make sense, and likewise the US land troops here. And some of these counters, like I don't really care if those are single stacked. So I was able to get them in 2 trays pretty comfortably and very well organized. So I'm pretty happy with how they look right now. Now the question is, can we get everything back into the box? Now, obviously, everything was tight vertically here with this inset here. So I'm going to have to break this inset down, then put everything in, and we'll take a look and see how we did. All right, so we've got actually we've got all the player aids and the maps and everything in like that. If we put the 2 counter trays in here, this works out fine. Now the challenge is we got to get the cards in. If I have the cards in one big pile, they aren't going to fit. So I just spread them out into 2 stacks, and they fit nicely, actually very, very well. Then I can put the baggies here if I want to, and the dice. Actually, I won't need the baggies, of course, but we'll put the 2 dice in there, and everything fits perfectly. Put the cover back on, and I think it's going to go, it should go all the way down. There's nothing sticking up at all. Yeah, that's perfect. It is absolutely 100% flush with the bottom of the box, and they are extraordinarily well organized here. Now, I think what I could do, just to kind of open this back up and take a look here, I think I could take that inset out if I were going to throw it away, and I could probably take that extra space and fit this in as well if that inset on the bottom was gone. It's going to be, I have to spread the cards out a little bit more, but everything would fit in. So if I wanted to get all the counters in a single layer, I think I could use this 3rd tray and put it in. But I kind of like the 2 tray system, so I think I'm going to go with that. And that is one of the things I do. So kind of evaluating the Cube4Me solutions, they are so slick. The thing that I like about them is that they make the setup so fast because you can see everything. It's so visible, and these trays are so thin. If you look at how thin they are, and yet they can still fit, 2 and 3 levels worth of counters. So it makes the setup and takedown really well, really fast and efficient. So I think for a game that you're going to play a lot, this is an excellent solution. And I love how it just keeps them all clean and nice and organized, and it's such a visual system, and it fits so nice in the box. I do wish there were kind of instructions for how Cube4Me envisioned you're supposed to put them together for a particular game, because I feel like this is the second game I've done it with now, and I've kind of winged it, and it's worked out fine. It's just a little bit of kind of a creative challenge where sometimes I'm thinking, oh, if I had instructions on how you thought I could do this, that might make it go a little bit faster, and I know I'd be getting it kind of as envisioned. But yeah, I like this. This is really slick. This is going to be, really, really, really nice to use and put together for this game. I think it's going to make the setup and takedown real quick. So there you are, Cube4Me Challenge. Let me know what you think. Back in the box, everything works pretty well. Very excited to get this one to the table. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them down below. If you've enjoyed this unboxing, you might also enjoy our other unboxing of Mark Herman's Pacific Adventures, the Pacific War from GMT Games. I'll put a link to that one right here. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.